I don't think anybody can truly understand the level of catharsis I feel when I raise problems on this channel, notably with Wayland protocol development, and I then get told, you shouldn't talk about this, you're meddling, you making videos about this, that's bad, stop doing that, you're not a Wayland protocol developer, so leave the project alone. And then I see people who are directly involved in Free Desktop raise the exact same problems that I raise and get treated just as badly. Because this makes me realize it never had anything to do with the person raising the problems. It is entirely about the thing being raised and the fact that some people don't want to see it resolved. Now, I want to be very clear. Unlike you may have heard from some people, Wayland isn't controlled by Red Hat, and Red Hat is pulling all the strings, and Red Hat is trying to ruin the Linux desktop. That is not what is happening. Anyone who is saying that is completely dishonest. Most people involved in Wayland are doing really good work and are trying to make something better. But like most big groups, there's always going to be, let's say, some bad apples. I'm not going to read the entire thread, feel free to read it linked in the description down below, but I do want to show you the starting comment because that is the main point that is important here. From Lude, an Xorg Foundation board member and Free Desktop COC committee member, I'm starting to think that we actually really do need a specification that defines a baseline of Wayland protocols to try to get close to application developers' expectations. I also really would like to see more expectations set around, please stop saying we're not trying to be Windows. I gotta be honest, I'm starting to realize this is a really dismissive response that ignores the fact that we have a protocol here that we are trying to get people to use, and people aren't really going to use something they're literally not able to develop for. TLDR, we need a specification that defines what it means to be a compliant Wayland compositor, and stop saying we're not trying to be Windows as a way to dismiss and disregard protocol development, because at the end of the day, if you're making a protocol, you need it to be something that actually aligns with what application developers want. If you make a protocol that doesn't, you've basically achieved nothing. If nobody's going to use the protocol, it effectively doesn't exist. With how much noise and bad reporting there is about Wayland, you might think there's some sort of consensus on how protocol development should be done, that everybody agrees that this is the right way to do it, but that couldn't be further from the truth. I'm not able to share DMs, but I am on very, very good authority that there are people that are very active within Wayland who want to see things change, who agree with a lot of the points I raise, not every single one of them, but agree with a lot of the issues I raise about how protocol development is conducted and would like to see things change. It's just making any major changes within Wayland gets you a lot of tension, a lot of pushback, and frankly, a lot of very angry replies. Now, very important context, things developed under Free Desktop, they are not standards. There is a lot of agreement on some of the core technologies, but Free Desktop is not a standards body. There are specifications produced under Free Desktop, but there is no standards body saying, this is the specification that you need to implement. This is the version you need to implement. This is an old, outdated version. This is a similar specification to do a similar thing, but we're not using that one anymore. It is just a place for specification and application and technology development to be done. And by extension, that includes Wayland protocols as well. Now, you might see things like Wayland Core, Wayland Stable, Wayland Staging, Wayland Unstable, Wayland Experimental, and reasonably think, okay, if something goes from staging into stable, or somehow being in staging is closer to being a standard than being unstable or experimental, that's not what those labels mean. Now, the labels do have a meaning. It's just they don't have any relation to whether or not something is considered a standard. There are protocols that are experimental and unstable that are just as adopted as staging and stable protocols. And there are protocols in unstable and experimental which basically no compositors adopt. So that label has no relation to the amount of adoption. Obviously, if something's been around for a long time and is achieving a very important goal, it's more likely to be adopted, but those labels specifically are not what indicates what that is. This right here is a very, very useful website. It can be a bit buggy with its styling. Okay, it's working now. This indicates what compositors adopt which protocols. This is so very useful. Why are the dots here not working now? Okay, they're... whatever. Website rendered weirdly. So, anything with a green dot, that's adopted. Anything with a red dot, not adopted. Very simple to understand. Even in Wayland core and marked as stable, there's not full adoption. Obviously, this one's been deprecated, that can be ignored, but GameScope ignores this protocol here and this protocol here. And that's part of core Wayland. Then as we scroll down through these stable protocols, there are a bunch of ones like tablet, which are not fully adopted, and then we get into staging. It then becomes kind of a random mess, and this is still in staging, right? We're not into unstable or experimental yet. It becomes completely random what is and is not adopted. When we get down to unstable right here, see this one right here? Very well adopted. But then right next to it is this. Or we have this one, which, okay, that one's deprecated, ignore that one. Then we have these ones, which are very widely adopted. And the reason for this is very simple. There is zero, nada, no compliance documentation, no explanation of this is what you need to implement to be a Wayland compositor. Nothing whatsoever. I don't want to see a situation where Wayland is a trademark that is enforced, where like legally pursuing projects, that just looks really bad. I don't want to see that done to force the implementation of certain protocols. But the problem is, there's not even like a gentleman's agreement. There's no expectation. There's not even like a baseline for what everybody even agrees with on what should be in a Wayland compositor. Now, obviously, different contexts are going to have different definitions for what a compliant Wayland compositor should be. If we're doing a car infotainment system, that's going to have very different requirements than a desktop Wayland compositor. A really great example here is session lock. This is your lock screen protocol. If you're doing a car infotainment system or some sort of like a terminal, like a McDonald's terminal, right? There's no reason to have the custom lock screen protocol, right? There's no situation where it needs to be there. If someone wanted to implement that, like that's fine. But that shouldn't be an expectation for something in those situations. But if we're talking about on the desktop, well, for a DE, I can reasonably see an argument for not implementing it. But if we're dealing with your standalone window managers, there is no reason why those shouldn't be implementing that protocol. And that's just one protocol. What about something like cursor shape? What about the fractional scale protocol? What about top-level drag as top-level list? Top-level drag? What about top-level icon? What about, what's a good one? XDG output or the layer shell protocol. A lot of these are very widely adopted, and these are very common things that people want to have access to on the desktop. Now, even though in some cases GNOME is genuinely doing a better job than some other compositors, like with fractional scale, like with cursor shape, and I'm sure there's other ones in here as well. Even though that is the case, the point where this discussion usually gets derailed is when it comes to GNOME, because the argument usually goes, you can't force us to implement anything. Why do you hate us so much? Why do you want to force open source developers to do things they don't want to do? And yes, like GNOME is a big source of contention when it comes to Wayland development. This is like really, really obvious if you just read through a lot of protocol development, not all of it, right? Like there are some protocols, like the HDR protocol, which was being led in big part by a GNOME developer. But the difference is there are compositors which don't agree with some protocols and don't implement them, but they just like don't care and just don't implement them. When it comes to GNOME, there's often like a big rehash of an old argument, even though in some cases they agreed or didn't disagree with a protocol being implemented. But there are protocols which are genuinely agreed upon as being a good protocol, like DMA buff, like XDG shell. Nobody disagrees that these are important and useful protocols. These are protocols where there is zero contention about whether or not they should be like a standard thing that everybody basically has to implement. Other examples, let's go into staging. Let's take something like the fractional scale protocol. Yes, it's not implemented everywhere. GameScope is a very special exception, so is Cage. Western doesn't implement anything. Or something like cursor shape. In the case of Wayfire not implementing it, and Mia and Louvre, these are most likely gonna do so. It's just their fairly small project, and they get to things when they get to things. But it seems like everybody agrees that, like, this is a important protocol, and I don't think there'd be any contention on whether or not this should be a core part of Wayland. This is not about what GNOME does and doesn't want, or any other desktop does and doesn't want. This is about setting the expectation for what a Wayland compositor is and should strive for. And if you want to diverge from that, if you want to make a special kind of compositor, hey, that's fine. And there should be different contexts and different definitions for different kinds of Wayland compositors. I don't think a desktop definition would apply to a car infotainment system. I don't think a terminal would apply to a desktop. And this all makes sense, right? But at the same time, there should be a baseline expectation so users, and more importantly, developers, know what they can target. Because currently, you don't target Wayland because there is no Wayland definition. What you do is target a desktop that you know has that protocol, and then hope and pray that that is a protocol that other projects also adopt. And if it's something like a fractional scale, like a cursor shape, like a XDG shell, that's probably going to be adopted. Like a session lock, it's probably going to be adopted. But there are cases where, because there is no definition on what Wayland should strive for, you don't have any really idea if it's gonna work there or ever gonna work there. Now, even though I want this to happen, it should happen, and I know there are people that are Wayland developers who want the same thing as well, it's probably never gonna happen for the same reason so many protocols get blocked for way too long. What's going to happen is there's going to be a really good discussion about what protocols should be included, and 98% of the list is going to be completely fine. Then someone's going to come along and take major issue with that protocol being included, even though everybody else agrees it is a really good protocol, it's a standard protocol, and every other desktop adopts it. And then old arguments are going to be rehashed, arguments that were brought up during the protocol development and were already hashed out, and then they were fine with the protocol being adopted, and then it's going to devolve into absolute chaos. It's going to be like 200 comment thread. 3 years later, it's going to remain open. Someone comes along and tries to revive it. Rinse and repeat. The cycle continues. Now, I know certain people are not going to watch the entire video, are going to get angry, and I'm going to see some dumb comments about it. This is not just about GNOME. One important aspect often overlooked are the desktop portals. Say what you will about this approach and the use of desktop portals, but this is the direction that things are heading. This is the way that we're doing a lot of security stuff on Linux. The exact same problem exists over there as well. There is zero expectation for what a complete portal implementation actually looks like, and this is something that directly affects the usability of Wayland. Now, in the case of GNOME and KDE, they, for the most part, agree on what should be included in the portal. There might be things that are not included, but in those cases, it's usually because they've just not finished the implementation yet, not that they fundamentally disagree on the fact that that should be a portal. WL Roots, though. WL Roots has a portal that's lacking almost all functionality. So if you want a usable portal, you also need to include the GTK portal. But the GTK portal doesn't include everything either, because that's a generic portal, and for the full implementation, you need something that actually hooks into that desktop and hooks into the way it specifically does things. Whilst I do think things like Sway are really cool, I don't tend to recommend them anymore solely for this reason. Also, the fact that the WL Roots portal for screen capture, which is one of the things it does include, doesn't allow you to do individual window capture. There is issues open about it. There's things being worked on, but right now you can't do that. So if you want to do that, like, it's just not functional. This is why when it was based on WL Roots, I would recommend Hyperland, because Hyperland had its own custom portal implementation that ironed out a lot of those problems. Still not perfect. It still was missing a lot of functionality, but it was vastly better than the WL Roots portal. Now, obviously, implementations take time. Nobody's denying that. Nobody's trying to force work to be done immediately. And I've probably spent more time than any other Linux YouTuber talking about project funding. I understand that people have to pay for things. Yes, project funding is very, very important. We all agree on this. Let's move on from this. At the same time, though, there is currently zero expectation, zero guideline for what a complete Wayland implementation should look like, portals included. This is not a problem that will resolve itself, and resolving this problem is not an attack on desktops that don't want to follow along. What it is a guideline for developers to know what they can expect if they are developing for Wayland. Because what you get if you don't have that is you get posts where developers are trying to do things and they base it on some outdated information, think that certain things don't work because they tried to do it on a desktop where it doesn't work, even though on everything else it does. And it just creates this big mess where it just makes things harder for developers who want to support Wayland but have no idea how or what they can expect to see. If anything, right now, it's a problem that is going to only continue to worsen as there is more and more divide within the Wayland project. I've talked about this before, but now that there is a lot of projects making compositors that are voting members within Wayland, you can legitimately just say, I don't care what this other major party wants. We're just going to push the protocol through. And this has been done a number of times, and this is going to continue happening. If people don't knack a protocol, which is a very controversial thing to do, especially if they had no plans to implement it anyway, you can get all the implementations and just ignore one or two desktops, and now you have a situation where even though everybody else agrees with it, one party is just never going to do so. But if you're a developer trying to target Wayland, unless you dig through these protocol discussions, you'll never understand what is and is not generally accepted as a good protocol design. The best thing you can do is go to websites like this one and just base it off of this. This is the closest thing you have to a specification. It's not a specification, though. It's not a guideline. It is a description of the way that things currently function. I know that there are people that want to see this problem resolved, and I hope there can be some movement in this direction. But at the same time, I know that there are people who both don't care and also don't want to see the problem resolved. I'm not going to come up with reasons for why they don't want to see it resolved. Maybe they just like chaos. I don't know. I'm not in their heads. But you know, Wayland. Wayland is one of those things which is... It's a never-ending fountain of discussions. It's a never-ending area of conflict, we'll say. I want to see this resolved. Let me know your thoughts down below. Do you agree? Do you not agree? Are you a Wayland developer who wants to say something about this? I would love to know. If you like the video, go like the video. Also subscribe as well. That's cool. And if you really like the video and you want to become one of these amazing people over here, check out the Patreon, Scribes, Daily Bearer Pay, linked in the description down below. That's going to be it for me, and one day Wayland will be complete, and we'll be looking back on this time with a historical view, and I can't wait for that time. It'll be nice.